might be asking the question, why small groups? Why all the trouble to start connect groups? Because it's pretty inconvenient. I mean, I've been all over the world where I've heard these sort of excuses. You don't know how busy our city is. Our people can only go to one meeting a week. Well, if that's the case, can Sunday make it the small meeting? That's how important it is. I've gone to some places where they say it's too dangerous. In some of the townships in South Africa and some of the farming areas, it's very dangerous to go home and to leave home after dark. And yet small groups are happening all over our country to great effect. So why? You ask, why? Well, it's God's plan. If you look at the early church, they didn't just meet in temple courts. They met from house to house. Have you thought how it was that 5,000 people, 3,000 people, and their women and children and friends, etc., got added to a church in a single day? How did that work? How did the church keep its values and keep its sense of family, so much so that there were no needy among them, that they gave their gifts to each other, that they devoted themselves to fellowship and to breaking of bread? How did that work if there were just like 10,000 people in a big building? It didn't work like that. It worked from house to house. When they planted churches, it was from house to house. It was like the two lungs that the early church breathed with. They met in temple courts. They met in massive groups where there was devotion to apostolic teaching and to prayer. But they met from house to house where there was breaking of bread, where there was handling of issues, dealing with crises that they faced. And so when you get into a connect group, this is what happens, is that people get a sense of belonging. Remember when Lydia got saved, the woman who dealt with purple cloth? She said this to Paul and his companions: if you consider me a believer, come home to my house. And so she hosted meetings in her home. And this is what she said: if you consider me a believer, if you consider me part of you, you come back to my place. So in other words, when we do faith in each other's homes, there is a sense of family, of getting together. There's a handling of crises. Where do you handle a crisis? If you're sitting there quietly with 10,000 people around you, who knows the issues you're going through? Remember in Acts chapter 12, when the disciples were buttoned down, Peter was in jail, James had lost his head. Where were they? They were at Mary's house. That's where they were. I tell you what else happens in small groups, in houses and connect groups, is that gifting is developed. Remember the house of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus? Jesus loved to go to that house. Mary, she developed her gift of worship and extravagant generosity. And it says there in a couple of the Gospels, she hung on every word that Jesus spoke. Lazarus exercised his gift of being a friend. He was a relational colossus. Jesus knew when he came to that house, that gift was being exercised. And then, of course, there was Martha, who owned the joint, who got the logistics going, who was administratively inclined. So what am I saying? I'm saying giftings develop in the smaller grouping. They pray from house to house. So essentially, the reason why we have connect groups is that our connectedness, our relationships, our values, our ministries can be authentically worked out far more so than if you in massive congregations and big buildings. What you find is that if a church doesn't develop small groups, and it's insistent on being authentic in its faith, it'll never grow more than 150. There are many anthropological studies that say that when people are in groups of bigger than 150, they feel like it's become administrative, no longer family. They're lost in the numbers. That's an anthropological discovery. And so churches, of course, can get a lot bigger if they are not using small groups, but then they're not really, they're just preaching halls. They're just a guy with a great gift calling a massive crowd together. But if you're wanting to live out New Testament Christianity, you've got to be able to do that in small groups as well as your big crowds. And so I've got this challenge for you, because it's God's plan that they multiply from house to house. I'm challenging you to lead a connect group. Put up your hand to be trained to lead a connect group. If you're already leading it, raise somebody else that can take over your group so you can go and start another one. I believe we should be inviting new people into our connect groups because that's how they get connected with the body. If you're already leading a connect group or part of a connect group, this is my challenge to you. Invite new people in. Let them come and journey with you in the lounge, not just in the row in front of you on a Sunday. Those of you who are involved in connect groups, we model our faith there. So I'm challenging you to be active, prophesying and bringing the word and meeting people, encouraging people. And that's what we do. That's where our faith is outworked. Talk about it. Talk about it to people who are not in connect groups. I spoke to a guy the other day who said, I don't go to connect groups because I only want to listen to good preachers. So I said to him, well, your understanding of connect groups is really wrong. It's not a forum for some other dude to preach to you for half an hour. It's a place where we wrestle through the word together. We connect with God. That's why we call them connect groups. You connect with God, you connect with each other, and you connect with the Bible. And if those three elements are missing, if you're not connecting with people, something's wrong with that connect group. If you're not connecting with God, in other words, people aren't praying and there's a presence of God there, something wrong with that connect group. And if you're not connecting with the Bible, in other words, you're just talking about ideas, they're not biblical ideas, well, then there's something wrong with it. So that's why we call them connect groups. And so connect groups are very much in God's plan for you and for me. Jesus did far more preaching, far more miracles, far more discipling, far more training in homes than he did in synagogues and temples. And that should be our model too.